wonderful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, that students actually all the time. And listen to
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. To those joining us perhaps for the first time here for HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, we can be found now every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, in the top of the hour, let me thank you for your very thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, because after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show now proudly in its 27th season. We have great guests lined up for you today, and we have some great suggestions for that you've given me for guests coming forward in this COVID-19 and post-George Floyd find ourselves, and we're going to address a lot of those issues. Many of them, interestingly enough, ends up being interconnected, interrelated, and interdependent of each other as we look at the complex social, economic, and political realities in which all of those issues reside. So to start off today's show, the issue that is paramount in front of us, even as recently as noon today with the press conference of our county judge and our mayor to say that, guess what, folks, school ain't happening in Houston, not face-to-face, not until at least September 8th. And the guest that I have with me today is one who already set that whole discussion in motion, in context, by the wonderful Houston Chronicle op-ed that she did this past Sunday. Ann McCoy. Ann McCoy is a consulting psychologist, and Ann really laid it out. And I wanted her to be on, not knowing that the judge and the mayor were going to do what they did today. But let me just start before I introduce Ann officially with the opening paragraph of their op-ed, which I thought was so poignant, right to the point. We experience cognitive distance when we hold contradictory ideas. The experiencing these inconsistencies tends to be stressful and disorientating. In order to regain a sense of balance, we often engage in self-deception and ignore the reality of a situation. In order to regain a sense of balance, we often engage in self-deception and ignore the reality of the situation. Which I always thought, Ann, that was so great words, so wonderful words, well put together. In other words, you basically said we lie to ourselves and we try to be in denial.
Right.
Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here because you have truly been involved in education throughout this community for years and doing your research and all the other wonderful things you've done when it comes to urban public education. You really have studied the issues, and I'm really happy and proud to have you on this week's Dialogue Houston.
Thank you for the invitation, Larry. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let's talk about your op-ed piece, because it has started a great dialogue in this community about whether or not we should go back to school face-to-face. Is it early? Is it not? How do we do it virtually, electronically? But you also make the great points of what's happening by us not being able to be face-to-face. And so all of that is all wrapped together. So I'll just turn it over to you for a little minute, and I'll come back with some questions. Kind of give us the context.
We thought that this is a historic moment that the world is going through. And when it comes to school and education, it's important to recognize that what we knew previously is no more. And we felt that it's important to get the input of teachers when it comes to education, because quite often we hear from administrators, but we don't hear from those people who are really on the front line every day. No one knows what goes on in a classroom as much as a teacher does. And so that was our approach in terms of trying to understand what's really happening in schools. And so we set about the task of identifying teachers who would talk to us and asking them a series of questions about what their experience was with the online learning, what concerns they had about students' readiness, whether or not they saw social distancing working in their classrooms. as well as in their from their perspective, what does it mean to be educated?
The whole question about social, emotional, and cognitive development is so important. And you know, there's many ways people have talked about this COVID-19 as now we have COVID-19 deprived educated students. Now we have emotionally students that are scarred because of COVID-19, scarred because they can't have social interaction with their fellow students, scarred in so many ways. Do you see that this has really pushed back the development of so many of the kids who are already kind of on the borderline, particularly in some of our inner city urban school situations, that this has just made the hole even deeper for them to try to get out of?
I think it's too soon to come to any kind of conclusions around that.
All right.
Because there are students for whom the distance education has been perhaps more effective, because we talked to teachers who said that they had students who were able to demonstrate skills that they'd never seen before. And so to paint this with a broad brush and say that it's the worst thing that's ever happened to students, or it's the best thing that's ever happened to students, this will be a mixed bag when we look back on it, in terms of we have to see it as this is a crisis, but it also represents an opportunity. And so what are the opportunities in this crisis? I think that as a culture, we are traumatized. So yes, we have to talk about traumatized teachers, traumatized school staff members. Everyone who has experienced this pandemic has experienced some form of trauma or dislocation in terms of what we have become accustomed to.
Part of the thing that has been discussed as kind of a sidebar, not only to your wonderful editorial, but this ongoing discussion within HISD, is that we're talking about a school district, in the case of HISD, that is predominantly children of color, that are children of color who in many ways have had marginalized experiences in some of their schooling. You put this COVID thing on top of it, you put whether it's virtual learning or face-to-face learning. And some of those things that come out of those conversations are, what are we doing extra to ensure, as you said, that the level playing field that was not level to start with, at least now, because of making sure everybody has the technology they need, the bandwidth, association to be able to be online, to make sure that that equalizer is in place. Are we really taking extra steps to make sure that's happening?
I think that what this has pointed out is that there's so many students who don't have access to broadband. And so this limits their ability to take advantage of the opportunity that online learning represents. And that's something structural that it seems that the district as well as companies can address. But again, I think it takes stepping back, taking a big picture, long-term view of this issue. So we've known that HISD educates over 80% of their students are on free or reduced lunch. So they have needs that are met through schools, food, the electronic divide. So schools provided laptops and they provided hotspots. However, that wasn't enough. It's important that schools take this as an opportunity to really understand what are the structural needs if we're going to continue to do online schooling. And I've thought about this in terms of when we have these weather events and we have these flood days, basically. So this provides a way, if districts address this proactively, or at this point it's reactively, but to create this second way of getting education. And maybe it is asynchronous, but at least it provides the opportunity for students to get the education that they need when they can.
So the business community, the philanthropy community in Houston has always kind of stepped up when we needed them to do so. And if we quote our good friend Stephen Kleinberg's statistics, that 70% of everyone under 20 in Houston is a person of color, Hispanic, or African American. our future workforce was already in somewhat questionable situation going forward before COVID-19. Now it seems to me that every aspect of the community, however we define community, has to step up and play the role that they have to play, and really come to the table and bring something. Because you said it so well, in the interim, in the gap, if you will, in the interim, the district has tried to fulfill almost every level. Let's just use Maslow for a moment because we can work from that. This district has tried to fulfill every level of Maslow's theory of hierarchical learning, starting with the basic needs, the safety needs, the belonging needs, the esteem needs. But a district can't do that all by themselves.
No, especially a district that does not get the funding that it
Exactly.
needs.
Exactly. So it's time, it seems, that we've talked about, and Kleinberg says again, I love quoting him, his survey shows that people in Houston are willing to pay more for education. They're willing to even tax themselves more now than ever before for public education. But there seems to be still the hesitancy and resonance on the people who need to bring the question to the table to increase taxes, to raise taxes, to do so, even though the survey shows that people are willing to have themselves taxed.
All right.
So that disconnect allows this gap to continue in the resegregated HISD, which it totally is. I think there's 8.9% Anglo kids left HIS this school year. And the post-George Floyd environment, you combine that with the COVID-19 reality, it seems to me that this should be an easy conversation to have. But every time you and I and others raise it, it still falls on deaf ear.
Right, because there's this notion that people like to push that there isn't enough money, when in fact there is enough money.
How we use it, right?
Right, and there has to be a real we need to take a real unflinching look at, do we really value education? More than just lip service, but is it something that where we are ready and willing to put our money? In the long term, so investing in a future that is not ours.
Right.
So that children who are not ours can have a better future.
So here I go, and you know where I'm headed, because you gave me the great lead in. And I think it's become even more than, do we value education and do we value the future? I think it's, do we value these children? Do these children of color, the majority of our school district in a resegregated environment, our future work, do we value these children as fully human beings? All lives matter, all lives are equal, Black lives matter. Or do we see them as expendable somehow? Because when you say you value something, you do certain things a certain way. When you say that you cherish something, you do things a certain way. That old phrase, don't tell me you love me, just show me you love me, use words only as necessary, that I want to see it in your behaviors and your actions. And that's not forthcoming. So the same thing that has created the world of George Floyd, that allowed that police officer in Minnesota to put his knee on his neck and do what he did to something he saw less than a human being, less than a fully human being with no value, less than an animal, less than a thing or a piece of property going back to slavery, allowed that cold callousness to be done. So I think it's a question we have to beg going forward that's much deeper. Do we, as you said, not only do we value education, but do we value the children trying to get that education who may be different than myself, that does not look like me? Right. Because the power, the money's there. People with the power and the money is there. I just think it's time for a whole nother discussion about how we view these things. Because, you know, HISD in the segregated world, and by the way, educators are doing the best they can. Superintendent Layton, I think, is doing the best she can with what she's given to work with, but it's not enough. Right,
and I think that too often we are sold this notion of doing more with less.
Right.
Math just doesn't work. You don't do more with less, you do less with less. And starting from there, looking at what do we mean when we talk about equitable educational opportunities.
Uh-huh.
In order to provide students with equitable educational opportunities, we need to know what their needs are. And it may be that their needs will cost more than a student who comes from a family that's more affluent. And I think that with the money, we also have to recognize what we're investing in. We're investing in teachers, more teachers. We're investing in the physical facilities in which students go to school, as well as the resources that they need in order to be successful in school. And I think that this pandemic will continue to force us to grapple with questions of what do we want to create? Because the system that we had, we all know that it was deeply flawed, but it's important to recognize this as an opportunity to improve that system. And I think that when I read about there are micro schools going up, or where parents are engaging the services of a certified teacher to teach their students, teach their children, whereas those children who are poor, their parents don't have those resources. And so what becomes of their education? What is it and how is it that they will best learn or take advantage of the opportunities that are out there?
And you speak to this in your op-ed, and I concur, because the parents and teachers I've talked to and students, you use the word debilitating anxiety. And I think there's so much stress and fear right now, fear of all kinds of things, illness and death and uncertainty and the unknown, that as you describe these schools or semi-schools or micro schools that are popping up, you're creating now a third and fourth level of education.
Yes.
And the have and have-nots, and those who can now band together and be part of the haves because they can come together collectively and pay for it where they can't pay for it individually, are creating this whole outside world system of education where, again, the least, the last, the lost, who've always been in public urban education, are going to lose out again, even more so in some ways than they have in the past. And so we're going to end up, because the schools, let's be clear, the schools are resegregated not only along the racial lines, but more along economic lines right now. The reason we have the resegregation of HISD. So now we're taking that resegregation along economic lines to even a different, deeper level of resegregating again along a different layer of economics.
Right.
So if we keep going down that road, there is going to be a whole, and I see this at HCC when I teach my classes, there's going to be a whole new group of kids, a gap, that are just, they have nowhere to go. I got, just like you and I've talked, and you did some wonderful work and research when you were at U of H along this line also. We get students at HCC who have graduated, got a real diploma, not a GED, got a real diploma, who cannot read and write.
Right.
You know, and so what's going to happen?
You know, I have concerns that things are going to get worse because remember the Supreme Court's decision last month with the Espinoza versus Montana is going to allow schools to send more public money to private schools. So again, do we value public education as a social good? And who do we include in that group to benefit from this social good?
Yeah.
We know that everyone is, and I bring that up because while we are concerned about the issues that schools faced before the pandemic, there are still events that are unwinding or unfolding that will continue to adversely affect public education. And so it becomes important to say that we need legislation that really will protect the funding for public education.
Mm-hmm.
And where is that conversation? So I think we need to start talking about what is the education system that we want on the other side of this pandemic? What should that look like?
So let's talk about that for a moment. The portal that we've been given, this portal, this middle passage, this time in between from now until whatever's on the other side of whatever the new normal will be after COVID-19, speaks to your point that maybe it's time to really examine what do we mean by systemic change and system change, right?
Right.
So you and I are both enough of academic to put it in this terms real quick. The system has always been the problem. What is a system? An organized body of people gathered around values, structures, and individuals, right? Values are defined, structures are put in place to implement systems, people are identified to maintain structures and institutions. Systemic change occurs when values, structures, and individuals change. Okay, so it seems to me to get the kind of urban public education we want, there is a deep systemic system change that has to happen, and it may include changing out a lot of the players that we have now.
Right.
Because
right.
power is only two kinds of power. Power is large sums of money, or power is organized numbers of people. Organized numbers of people can always outdo money.
Right.
You vote them in, you vote them out. And so it seems to me that to get to schools we want for the students we desperately need, the type of education for the students we definitely have to have, it may be time to look at how we think about urban public education as a civil rights issue that is a right. And we've toyed with that since the civil rights movement. We've never pushed that issue.
Right.
And you've talked about this when you ran for the school board.
Yes. That I think where we are right now, we have to not so much worry about trying to maintain a system that was not working as it is to create a new system.
Mm-hmm.
Because the system will do what it was always meant, what it was constructed to do. So from this new system, what is this new system intended to do? What do we expect it to do? Why is education important in this society? Do we want an informed populace so that people know about what their rights are and how to exercise those rights? Do we want an informed populace that thinks differently and will take our culture in a different direction? And I think to the extent that we do want an informed populace, then what does that look like? What do they need? What do students need to know how to do once they graduate from school? And I know that some of the early TEA guidance was saying that students needed to have at least 4 hours of instruction a day. Well, we know the students are in school 6-7 hours a day. So what is all of that other time spent doing? And what are the subjects, when we pull it all apart, what is it that students actually need to know in order to be successful? We know that it's not the results of the STAR test. But when we go back and look at business and industry, and we look at a future that is likely to look quite different from the lives we've lived to date, and not just due to the pandemic, but also the advances in technology and how the world is shifting. So what are the fundamentals? What are the basics that students need to be able to know and know how to do?
Well, and I've talked a lot about it along with other people. To your exact point, it's not enough just to survive and get it. We want people to thrive. Thriving is we want people really to thrive, develop to the fullest of their God-given potential as human beings, and do everything we can to help assist that, make that happen. And what I'm struck as you were talking about this moment in time of where we are now, for such a time as this, as I refer to it, one of the reasons we have public education and one of the tenets of public school was to create good citizens, to have students understand what it meant to be a citizen living in a democracy. And part of that is so tied into where we are today. And quickly, you and I, you know, the 5 tenets of being a citizen in a democracy, we love to talk about 2 of those 5. What are my individual rights and privileges? That's the great I and me discussion. It's all about me, right? I might say it's about you, but it's really, in the end, it's all about me. So the I and me discussion, individual rights and privileges. But the other 3 are common duties, obligations, responsibilities to each other. To find the other someone different than myself, someone that does not look like me. That's the we and us discussion. We the people. We have never in this country, in America as a nation, we have never gotten to we the people. And we see it played out now in so many ways in society now. The veil is off, the veneer is off, the fake tolerance is off. And now what we see is that America is in trouble, but is in trouble on so many levels because we've never done properly the educational process around I and me and we and us. And so now we're divided along every definition of divide that you can have. So in the minute we have left, get us out of here and tell us what's the thing that might help bring some of this together going forward.
I think that ultimately this pandemic is going to bring us together in ways we don't recognize yet, because we're still very early on in this whole process. I think you make the point about citizenship. I was thinking not too long ago about, as a child, we had to, one of the things that was promoted was good citizenship. Are you being a good citizen? And I think the mask issue is a clear example of what does it mean to be a good citizen. You're not simply protecting, we have a duty to protect each other. And until we recognize that we are all in this together, this is our country. We are equal holders of its future, and we are equally responsible for the future that we leave to those who come after us. And this moment calls on us to act in that way. But I think we still have a lot of people for whom that realization has not sunk in.
Right. We have to stop there. We're out of time. We actually probably ran a little over, but I didn't want to cut it off because it was a great conversation we're having. I appreciate you being on. Look forward to working with you going forward. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
I'll just end with this real quick because I know I'm out of time. Let us please all continue to wear our masks. We wear our masks for others, not for ourselves. Be well, be safe, be considerate of other human beings, and realize that that other person around you is truly a human being, just as equal to you and just as important to you as anyone else in your life, whether you know them or not, as your neighbor. So until next week, we'll come to you again and we'll continue this great dialogue. Be safe, be well, and as always, peace, power, and love.